Have you ever noticed how sometimes Allah reminds us through the smallest things? Not through thunder, not through earthquakes, but through something so tiny, so disliked, that it instantly grabs your attention. You walk into your home, a place of peace, and suddenly you see it. A cockroach. Your heart feels uncomfortable, your mind reacts immediately, and your soul feels disturbed. But what if this moment is not random? What if it's not just about an insect? What if Allah is gently tapping your heart, saying, "Pay attention"? Let us reflect. Everything happens by the will of Allah, whether we understand it in the moment or not, whether it feels significant or insignificant, whether it brings comfort to the heart or discomfort to the soul. In Islam, we are taught that nothing in creation moves, rests, appears or disappears except by His permission. The falling of a leaf, the beating of a heart, the arrival of ease, and even the presence of something small and unwanted all occur within the divine knowledge and decree of Allah. This understanding is not meant to create fear, but awareness, because when a believer knows that Allah is in control of every detail, life stops feeling random and begins to feel purposeful. Often, people think Allah's will is only present in major life events, marriage, wealth, illness, loss, or success. But the Quran repeatedly reminds us that Allah is Al-Latif, the most subtle. His will manifests not only in loud events, but in quiet moments, ordinary experiences, and things we tend to overlook. What we call coincidence is often divine timing, and what we call inconvenience can be divine instruction. Allah's will operates with wisdom that goes beyond human logic, arranging circumstances in ways that awaken hearts, correct paths, and bring attention to what has been ignored. When something enters your life unexpectedly, it is not merely an interruption, it is an invitation to reflect. Allah does not waste signs, and He does not allow things to happen without meaning. Sometimes His will is a test of patience, sometimes a reminder to be grateful, and sometimes a warning wrapped in simplicity. The believer is encouraged to pause and ask, not why me, but what is Allah teaching me? Because divine will is never cruel, even when it feels uncomfortable. It always carries mercy, guidance, or protection, even if the wisdom is hidden at first. Understanding that everything happens by the will of Allah transforms how a person reacts to life. Instead of panic, there is reflection. Instead of anger, there is humility. Instead of neglect, there is awareness. A believer begins to see life as a series of messages rather than meaningless events, recognizing that Allah communicates with His servants in ways suited to their hearts. When this belief settles deeply within the soul, even the smallest occurrence becomes a moment of consciousness, reminding the servant that they are never alone, never unnoticed, and never outside the care and knowledge of their Creator, who manages every affair with precision, justice and mercy beyond human comprehension. Signs can come in ordinary forms to awaken our hearts, because Allah does not always speak to His servants through events that shake the earth or moments that leave people in shock. Very often, His reminders arrive quietly, disguised within daily life, hidden inside things we see every day and rarely question. The human heart has a tendency to become accustomed to routine, and when comfort settles in, awareness begins to fade. It is in this state of forgetfulness that Allah sends signs so subtle that only a reflective heart will pause long enough to notice them, while a distracted heart will dismiss them as meaningless or random. The wisdom of ordinary signs is that they interrupt familiarity without overwhelming the soul. A sudden discomfort, an unexpected encounter, a repeated minor disturbance, or something out of place in an environment meant to feel safe, can serve as a spiritual nudge. Allah knows the hearts of His servants better than they know themselves, and He chooses reminders according to what will reach them without breaking them. These signs do not come to frighten, but to awaken, not to punish, but to redirect attention back to what truly matters. When a heart has drifted from remembrance, Allah brings it back gently through something simple that causes reflection rather than fear. Ordinary signs are powerful because they challenge the assumption that guidance must always be dramatic. In reality, the Quran repeatedly points to everyday elements, the alternation of night and day, the creation of insects, the balance in nature, as proofs for people who think. When Allah places a sign in something small, it strips away excuses because there is no spectacle to distract from the message. The believer is forced to confront their own state, their own habits, and their own level of awareness. What seems ordinary becomes extraordinary when viewed through the lens of faith and reflection. A heart that is awake understands that repetition itself can be a sign. When the same reminder appears again and again in different forms, it is not coincidence, but insistence. Allah does not abandon His servants to negligence without warning them first. He places reminders along their path, allowing them opportunities to return, to correct, and to renew their connection with Him. These ordinary signs are acts of mercy, reaching people where they are, in moments they least expect, gently stirring the heart from spiritual sleep and calling it back toward consciousness, humility, and remembrance. Cleanliness and faith are deeply connected in Islam because the religion does not separate spiritual purity from physical order. Islam addresses the human being as a whole, recognizing that the state of the body, the environment, and the heart influence one another. From the very beginning of worship, cleanliness is made a requirement, not an option. Before a believer can stand in prayer, they must purify themselves, teaching that approaching Allah requires both inward sincerity and outward discipline. This connection shapes a Muslim's daily life, turning ordinary acts of cleaning into acts of worship when done with awareness and intention. Physical cleanliness in Islam is not merely about appearance or comfort, but about mindfulness and respect for what Allah has entrusted to us. The body is an amanah, the home is an amanah, and the spaces we occupy reflect our sense of responsibility. When cleanliness is neglected, it often signals a deeper carelessness, where order, intention, and discipline begin to fade. Islam trains the believer to be attentive, to notice details, and to remove impurities promptly, because a clean environment supports a focused mind and a present heart. Disorder in one's surroundings can quietly lead to disorder in one's spiritual routine. The link between cleanliness and faith also serves as a constant reminder of accountability. Repeated acts of purification throughout the day reinforce the idea that a believer must continually return to a state of readiness to meet Allah. Just as dust and impurity naturally accumulate, the heart too gathers distractions, mistakes, and heedlessness. Islam does not expect perfection, but it demands awareness and effort. Through regular cleansing, the believer learns that purity is not a one-time achievement, but a continuous process that requires attention and humility. Cleanliness also nurtures self-respect and respect for others, both of which are rooted in faith. A clean person is conscious of how their actions affect those around them, just as a faithful person is conscious of their relationship with Allah. Islam discourages neglect, excess, and carelessness, encouraging balance instead. When a believer maintains cleanliness, it reflects an inner discipline that extends into prayer, behavior, and intention. Faith becomes visible through actions, and belief is reinforced through practice, creating harmony between what is seen and what is unseen, between the external world and the internal state of the heart. Neglect of spiritual or physical hygiene invites reminders because Allah, in His mercy, does not allow His servants to drift too far without being alerted. When care is withdrawn from either the body or the soul, imbalance begins to form, and that imbalance naturally attracts signs meant to restore awareness. Islam teaches that neglect rarely happens all at once. It develops slowly through small omissions that feel harmless at first. A prayer delayed, a space left unclean, a habit ignored, or a moment of reflection skipped can gradually shape a state of heedlessness and it is within this state that reminders appear. Physical neglect often mirrors spiritual neglect, even when a person does not realize it. When the environment becomes disordered, the mind follows, and when the mind becomes clouded, the heart loses focus. Islam emphasizes cleanliness not only for health, but for consciousness. When hygiene is ignored, discomfort enters, and that discomfort serves a purpose beyond irritation. It draws attention to what has been overlooked, forcing a pause and a moment of awareness. Allah allows these reminders to surface so that a believer may correct themselves while the matter is still small and manageable. Spiritual hygiene, like physical hygiene, requires consistency. The heart needs regular purification through remembrance, repentance, and humility. When these are neglected, the heart hardens gradually, becoming less responsive to guidance. In such moments, Allah sends reminders that are often subtle but persistent. These reminders may not appear as major trials, but as repeated disturbances that interrupt comfort and routine. They are not meant to harm, but to awaken, gently shaking the heart from complacency before deeper consequences unfold. Reminders that arise from neglect are acts of divine care, not signs of rejection. Allah warns before He corrects and corrects before He holds accountable. When a believer understands this, they begin to see discomfort differently. Instead of reacting with frustration, they reflect on their state, examining what has been ignored and what needs attention. These moments become opportunities for return, repair, and renewal. Through reminders, Allah creates space for self-awareness, allowing the servant to restore balance, cleanse what has been neglected, and realign their life with intention, discipline, and remembrance before negligence becomes habit and habit becomes distance. Allah warns before He punishes out of mercy, because His nature is not hasty, nor is He unjust toward His servants. Islam teaches that Allah is Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, and His mercy precedes His anger. Warnings are not signs of rejection, but evidence of care, because a being who does not care would allow destruction to arrive without notice. When Allah sends warnings, it is an invitation to pause, reflect, and return before consequences become severe. These warnings are placed within life in ways that give the servant time, space, and opportunity to correct themselves. Divine warnings often arrive gently, especially at first. They may come as discomfort, unease, repeated obstacles, or subtle disruptions to routine. Allah does not immediately strip blessings or impose hardship. Instead, He allows signs to appear that awaken awareness without overwhelming the soul. This gradual approach reflects mercy, because not every heart can withstand a sudden trial. Allah knows the limits of each person and warns them in a way that suits their capacity, giving them a chance to recognize their direction and adjust it willingly rather than being forced through pain. The purpose of warning is guidance, not humiliation. Allah does not expose faults to disgrace His servants, but to protect them from greater harm. Just as a loving parent cautions a child before danger, Allah alerts His servants before their actions lead them to regret. When warnings are ignored, they often repeat, increasing in clarity rather than intensity. This repetition is itself mercy, as it shows that the door of return remains open. Punishment is never the first response, it is the last, after reminders have been dismissed and opportunities neglected. Understanding this principle changes how a believer interprets hardship and discomfort. Instead of viewing every difficulty as misfortune, they begin to ask what Allah may be teaching them. Warnings encourage self-accountability and humility, reminding the servant that they are not independent of divine guidance. Through warnings, Allah preserves the dignity of His servants by allowing them to return on their own terms. These moments of caution are gifts disguised as interruptions, designed to protect faith, preserve balance, and redirect the heart before consequences arrive that could have been avoided through reflection and repentance. Self-reflection and repentance turn signs into blessings because they change how a believer responds to what Allah places in their path. A sign on its own is simply an event, but when met with awareness and humility, it becomes guidance. Islam encourages believers not to rush past moments of discomfort or interruption, but to pause and examine their state. Through reflection, a person begins to see beyond the surface of events and recognize the deeper message being offered. This process transforms what could have been a source of frustration into an opportunity for growth and closeness to Allah. Self-reflection allows the heart to become honest with itself. It removes defensiveness and replaces it with accountability. Instead of blaming circumstances or others, the believer turns inward, asking what has been neglected, what habits need correction, and what priorities have shifted. This inner dialogue softens the heart and opens it to change. Reflection is not about self-condemnation, but about clarity. It allows the believer to recognize patterns, identify weaknesses, and acknowledge the distance that may have formed between their actions and their values. Repentance gives direction to reflection. Without repentance, awareness remains incomplete. When a believer turns to Allah with sincerity, acknowledging shortcomings and seeking forgiveness, the heart experiences relief and renewal. Repentance is not only about seeking pardon for mistakes, but about realigning intention and behavior. Allah promises that sincere repentance is met with mercy, and through this promise, signs that once felt heavy begin to feel purposeful. What was once a warning becomes a means of purification, and what caused discomfort becomes a reason for gratitude. Through reflection and repentance, the believer learns to recognize Allah's care even in moments of unease. Signs are no longer seen as disruptions, but as divine interventions meant to protect and guide. This mindset nurtures resilience and trust, strengthening the relationship between the servant and their creator. Each sign becomes a reminder that Allah is attentive, aware, and invested in the believer's return. In this way, the heart grows more sensitive to guidance, more responsive to correction, and more capable of turning life's interruptions into moments of spiritual elevation and nearness to Allah. When all of this is understood together, the believer begins to see life through a lens of awareness rather than randomness. Everything that happens unfolds by the will of Allah, and every sign, no matter how small or ordinary, carries purpose for those who reflect. Cleanliness of the body and soul shapes the state of the heart, and neglect in either invites reminders meant to awaken, not to destroy. Allah's warnings are not expressions of anger, but expressions of mercy, offering opportunities to return before consequences take form. Through self-reflection and sincere repentance, these reminders are transformed into blessings, guiding the believer back to balance, discipline, and remembrance. In recognizing the wisdom behind signs and responding with humility, the heart learns to remain awake, receptive, and connected, walking through life with consciousness of Allah in every moment, every interruption, and every quiet reminder that calls the soul back to Him.